They called him just a mechanic, an old man with oil-stained hands who never dared to leave the ground. But oh, what secrets simmered beneath that quiet exterior. That night, the storm hit hard, a whiteout blizzard that swallowed everything in its path. A rescue team was out there, lost in the freezing chaos, their lives hanging by a thread. And when everyone else had vanished into the night, who was left standing? Jack Coleman. He didn't waste words, didn't argue with fate. He just reached for his dusty old helmet, strapped it on with trembling hands, and climbed back into the cockpit he'd sworn he'd never touch again. Because sometimes, the quietest soul hides the fiercest strength. Welcome to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where tales of compassion and courage light up the dark. So, what really happened that night? Let's dive in and find out. Picture this: the morning light barely grazed the weathered walls of Haven Ridge Air Rescue Station. Snowflakes, delicate little whispers of winter, danced in the biting wind that roared down from the mountains. Jack Coleman stood framed in the hangar's open doors, a chipped mug of black coffee steaming in his rough, calloused grip. He watched the young pilots strut around, their gear clanking, their laughter sharp and carefree, jokes he was never part of. To them, he was a fixture, as unchanging as the rusty bolts he tightened. A mechanic. Nothing more. Just a guy who kept their choppers humming, who never once slid into the pilot's seat. Day after day, he wore that same faded flannel shirt, those scuffed boots, and that calm, unreadable mask. Over in the corner, his tools gleamed in perfect rows, old friends who never asked questions. Jack lived by a simple creed: work done quietly was work done right. But to those cocky kids, he was just the wrench guy. Did they ever wonder why he shunned the cockpit? Did they even care that he'd once ruled the skies, feeling the heartbeat of the rotors like it was his own? Nope. And Jack, he never told them. Ava Turner, the greenest of the bunch, sometimes caught his eye with a flicker of curiosity. What was she thinking behind those wide, searching stares? She never pried, but you could tell she wanted to. Jack didn't give her an inch. He buried himself in his work, tweaking tension rods, inspecting fuel lines, making damn sure every bird was ready to soar. That was his world now, and it was enough. Or so he told himself. Every so often, though, he'd catch snippets of their chatter drifting over the hangar's hum. "Why doesn't Jack fly?" one would mutter. Did he ever? Another would scoff, "He's just a mechanic, man. Probably never had the guts." Jack stayed silent, wiping his hands on a greasy rag, moving to the next engine. But the truth? Oh, it weighed on him like a scar you can't stop touching. Years back, long before Haven Ridge, before these quiet, oil-soaked days, Jack had been a pilot. A damn good one. The kind you trusted when the world turned upside down. He could still feel that helmet pressing against his skull, the icy sting of high altitude seeping through a cracked canopy. Every second of it was burned into his memory. There'd been a mission, one final flight where the mountains stabbed the sky with jagged teeth. Jack was the lead, the guy who'd get his crew in and out, no questions asked. They skimmed low through canyons, the roar of the rotors swallowed by stone walls, their radio chatter tight and urgent. Jack could still hear those voices in his dreams, sharp, alive, trusting him. Everything was smooth until it wasn't. Ambush. Bullets ripped through the air, sparking off the fuselage, and the chopper bucked like a wild thing. Jack wrestled the controls, barking orders, fighting to keep her aloft. But then, disaster. The tail rotor gave out with a shriek of twisting metal, and the bird spun hard. He crash-landed it, barely, in a narrow clearing, the impact jarring his bones. His crew. They didn't make it. Jack was the only one to stumble from that wreckage, legs shaking, breath ragged, crawling out of a twisted door into a silence that screamed louder than the gunfire. The smell of fuel soaking into snow, the dead air after the last radio call faded, it clung to him, a ghost that never let go. When he dragged himself home, they handed him medals. Medals. He stuffed them in a box, out of sight, out of mind. He couldn't stomach the reminders. So he turned to wrenching, the only way he could stay close to the choppers without facing them head-on. He told himself he'd done enough, that this was his life now. But deep down, fear kept him chained to the ground. Jack never breathed a word of that mission to anyone. Not the crash, not the loss, not the guilt that gnawed at him. The young pilots didn't need to know, and he sure as hell didn't want their pity. Let them think he was just the wrench guy, a shadow in the hangar. Machines were simpler. They didn't judge, didn't haunt you with faces you couldn't save. All they asked for was the right bolt, the right twist, the right hands. Jack had those hands. He could give them that. The wind howled outside, rattling the hangar doors, and Jack moved from chopper to chopper, his fingers tracing leaks, feeling every hum like a heartbeat. He had a gift for listening without words, that's what kept him steady. Ethan Blake, the team leader, would swing by sometimes, all youthful swagger. "You sure this one's good, Jack?" he'd tease, half serious. Jack would nod, calm as ever. "She'll fly." And she always did. But even as he said it, a weight pressed on his chest. Days like this, when the sky darkened like that fateful mission, the memories clawed their way up. He'd grip the wrench tighter, let the cold air slap his face, and whisper to himself, that was then. This is now. Inside, the pilots traded laughs and tall tales. Jack half listened as he worked, their voices patching the holes in his quiet mind. He didn't envy them, he'd been that young, that fearless. But he knew fear's value now, how it could save you when bravado failed. As the snow thickened outside, he stepped to the doorway, the wind slicing across his weathered skin. He breathed it in, cold, silent, heavy. Was it penance, standing there alone while life buzzed around him? Back inside, he wiped his hands slow and deliberate. The radio spat weather updates, tension coiling in the air. Another storm was brewing, could he feel it in his bones, the way he used to read the sky from the cockpit? Jack set down his mug, picked up his wrench. No one noticed the way his hands lingered, the pause before each turn. And that was fine. He didn't need their eyes on him. He knew who he was. For now, that held him together. But then the snow fell harder, thick, relentless, swirling around the hangar lights like a shroud. Jack stood in the doorway, shoulders braced against the chill, watching the rescue team lift off. Ethan Blake's voice crackled over the radio, steady even as the storm swelled. Jack lingered long after the chopper faded into the dark, the cold seeping into him, stirring ghosts he'd buried deep. The hangar hummed softly behind him, a rhythm that steadied his hands while his mind wandered. Ava shuffled up, cheeks flushed, eyes sparking with nerves. "Storm's gonna be bad, huh?" she said, almost asking. Jack nodded, words stuck in his throat. He felt it, the wind clawing at the doors, the snow choking every sound. Trouble was coming. Hours ticked by, Jack drifting from machine to machine, double-checking, triple-checking, while the world outside turned white. He kept glancing at the radio, waiting for news that didn't come. The team was out there, lost beyond the peaks, and he knew what that meant better than anyone. Then, crackle, the radio snapped alive just before midnight. Ethan's voice cut through, taut with control but edged with something raw. "This is Eagle 3. We're grounded, visibility 0, requesting immediate evac support." Ava went pale, leaning closer. Jack froze, staring at the speaker, his mind flashing, iced rotors, a blind altimeter, the cold squeezing in. He'd lived that nightmare. The dispatcher replied, cool and collected, "Copy that, Eagle 3. Sit tight. We're coordinating support." But the truth hit like a punch, there was no one else. The other pilots were gone, scattered by the storm. Jack was it. The weight crashed onto him, icy and unyielding. Ava turned, lips trembling, but he just stared at the snow, the dark closing in. Memories flooded back, the engine's dying whine, the jolt of the crash, his crew's voices fading. He'd locked it away with those damn metals, but here it was, alive in the storm, his hands gripping the wrench like a lifeline. His pulse hammered, his breath hitched in the frigid air. Not my fight anymore, he told himself. I've done enough. But did he really believe that? Ava's voice pierced the quiet, soft, desperate. Jack, you're the only one here who can fly. A plea, not a command, and that's what broke him. He met her gaze, saw the fear, the way she hugged herself against the cold. She was young, but she got it, lives were on the line. Jack swallowed, words choking him. Silence stretched, the storm's roar filling the void. He saw that crash site again, smoking wreckage, red snow, the men he couldn't save. Guilt had grounded him for years. Then the radio crackled, Eagle 3 to base. We're losing heat. Repeat. We're losing heat. Ethan's voice strained, cracking. Jack shut his eyes. He knew that sound, the ice breaking beneath you. Could he do it? Could he face those demons and fly again? The question burned, but Ava's eyes held the answer. He had to. Slowly, he set the wrench down, hands steady despite the chaos inside. He crossed to his locker, pulled out his old flight suit, stiff, faded, but still his. Ava watched, breathless, as he strapped on the helmet that had once been his armor. Jack, she whispered, you sure? He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The fire in his eyes said it all. Can you believe it? When Jack Coleman opened his eyes, there she was, Ava, staring at him, her breath trapped in her chest like she feared the tiniest movement might shatter the moment. Jack sucked in a slow, shaky breath. Oh, how the weight of that decision crashed into his very bones. He set the wrench down with trembling care, his hands steady despite the wild pounding in his chest. Could he really do this? He shuffled toward the dusty locker in the corner, the one he hadn't dared touch in years. And there it was, his flight suit, waiting like a ghost from his past, the name patch faded but screaming with memories. He ran his fingers over the worn fabric, every flight, every mission, every soul-crushing loss stitched into those seams. Ava edged closer, her voice a fragile whisper in the tense air. Are you sure, Jack? Did she see the storm raging in his eyes? He didn't speak, words felt too small. Instead, he gave a single, heavy nod, a silent roar of everything he couldn't say. Slowly, oh so slowly, he pulled the suit on, his hands moving like they remembered what his heart wanted to forget. Muscle memory took over where his courage flickered. Could he really face the sky again? Stepping out into the snow, the hangar shrank around him, suffocating, claustrophobic. The wind slashed at his face like icy claws, but Jack didn't even flinch. No way would he let it win. Each step he took pulsed with defiance, a quiet rebellion against the fear gnawing at the edges of his mind. Ava trailed behind him, her breath puffing out in frantic white clouds against the freezing night. We'll get you prepped, she called, her voice quivering yet fierce. Did she believe in him as much as she sounded like she did? Jack didn't turn to her, his eyes locked onto Eagle 4, the helicopter he'd kept pristine, ready for a day he swore would never come. Climbing into the cockpit, every motion was a vow, a promise carved in silence. The seat hugged him like an old friend he'd abandoned, the controls steady under hands that hadn't forgotten. He paused, sucking in a breath to quiet the chaos thundering in his chest. The radio crackled, soft, alive, as he pressed the mic. This is Eagle 4, he said, his voice low, unshakable. I'm lifting off. Can you feel the gravity of that moment? In the stillness that followed, something clicked inside him. Oh, the peace of a man who knew there was no turning back. The rotors whirred to life, their deep thrum swallowing the night. Ava stood below, eyes wide, hands clenched. Did she know what this meant to him? Jack didn't look back, he couldn't. He knew his mission, knew his why. As the chopper soared into the swirling darkness, the fear didn't fade, how could it ever, but something fiercer rose up to meet it. The memory of the men he'd lost, their faces flashing in his mind, and that sacred promise he'd etched into his soul, never again would he leave anyone behind. The snow devoured the helicopter as it climbed, the storm wrapping it tight in its furious grip. But inside, Jack's hands were rock steady, his gaze piercing. For the first time in years, the sky wasn't a weight to bear but a call he couldn't ignore. The helicopter jolted as Jack wrestled it into the storm, snow slamming the windshield like frozen daggers, the wind howling like some wild beast. He gripped the controls, eyes glued to the flickering instruments. Could they guide him through this madness? In the back of his mind, old ghosts stirred, the echo of that night, his crew's voices fading, the engine's dying whine, the shriek of metal as the chopper fell. Jack clenched his jaw. No, he wouldn't let the past pull him under. He zeroed in on the mission, shoving the ghosts aside. The rescue team was out there, stranded, and he was their only lifeline. How could he fail them now? That truth steadied him as the chopper battled the icy air, climbing higher into the chaos. Below, everything was gone, just a white abyss. Pine Creek. Vanished, swallowed whole by the blizzard tearing through the mountains. Jack leaned on his instruments. Could he trust them when the world outside was nothing but snow? He thought of his lost crew, their names carved deep into his heart like wounds that wouldn't heal. Their laughter, their chatter through the headset, shards of a past he tried to bury. But fear wouldn't rule him, not tonight. With a steady hand, he tweaked the defroster vents, keeping the windshield clear. That flight suit. Heavy as guilt on his shoulders, but oh, how it grounded him, reminding him why he was here, why he had to do this. The radio snapped alive, a fragile lifeline in the roaring dark. Eagle 3, do you copy? Jack's voice cut through, calm as a lighthouse in a tempest. A pause, then Ethan's voice, raw with hope. Eagle 4. Jack, is that really you? It's me, Jack shot back, firm as stone. Hang on, I'm coming for you. Did they hear the promise in his words? He didn't need to say more, it was enough. As he plunged deeper into the mountains, the wind battered the chopper, shaking it like a rag doll. Jack tightened his grip, leaning into every gust, years of telling himself he was done with flying, and yet, right now, he'd never felt so alive. Memories hit hard, the last flight, the crash, the biting cold as he clawed from the wreckage. He let them flood in, why fight them, but he wouldn't let them steer. He was here, now, and this time, no one would be left behind. The chopper rocked as he crested a ridge, snow lashing the glass in furious waves. Visibility's zilch, he growled, adjusting the collective to keep her steady. That voice, low, unshaken, was the sound of a man done running from his shadows. Ethan's voice crackled again, desperate but clear. Jack, we're in a clearing, wounded, hypothermia's kicking in. Jack nodded to himself, could he pull this off? I'll find you, he murmured, and in that vow, his fear shrank back. He banked left, chasing the beacon's faint pulse through the static. The chopper groaned, but Jack knew every creak, he'd nursed these birds for years. The clearing loomed ahead, trees like dark sentinels in the snow. There, a glint of metal, the downed chopper half buried. Jaw tight, he hunted for a landing spot. The wind shoved back, but he rode it, guiding the skids down with a jolt that rattled his bones, but they held. Rotors still spinning, Ava's voice pierced the headset, tight with panic. Jack, status? He exhaled hard. On the ground, going in. Unbuckling, he stepped into the cold, a wall of ice slamming him. He trudged on, wind screaming, snow crunching underfoot, each step spitting in the face of his haunted past. Ethan, he bellowed, voice slicing the storm. A figure stumbled forward, pale and shivering. Jack, we didn't think anyone'd come. Ethan gasped. Jack's nod was steel. Let's move. They raced against the cold, loading the injured, Jack's hands steady as rock. Every trembling face fueled him. Ethan, last aboard, wheezed, You sure, Jack? Jack's eyes burned with certainty. We're all going home. Back in the cockpit, the warmth shocked his frozen skin, but he sank into the seat, hands wrapping the controls like a lifeline. Rotors thundered as he lifted off, the storm clawing at them. Every move was sharp, deliberate, lives hung in his hands, and he'd be damned if he dropped them. The engine's roar was his heartbeat, steady and sure. Can you imagine the terror and the thrill? The flight back was a heart-pounding blur of white and shadow, the world outside swallowed by the ferocious, unrelenting fury of the storm. Jack Coleman kept his focus locked tight on the instruments, those glowing dials his only lifeline, his heart pounding with the memory of what he was fighting for. For the first time in years, can you believe it? He felt the past and the present crash together, not in paralyzing fear, but in a blazing, unstoppable purpose. He flew through the night, the storm a living, roaring beast clawing at his helicopter. And then, oh, the relief, as the lights of Haven Ridge finally pierced through that suffocating dark, something inside him lifted. A crushing weight he'd hauled around for far too long finally eased in the frigid, biting air. He had faced the storm head-on, and he hadn't turned away, no way. The lights of Haven Ridge Air Rescue Station sliced through the chaos like a beacon of hope, pulling Jack Coleman and his battered, storm-weary helicopter home. The skid slammed down with a jolt. Did he really make it? The chopper settling into the snow-slick pad with a quiet, triumphant finality. Jack's hands didn't shake, not even a tremble, as he powered down the engines, the rotors slowing in the icy, crystalline night air. For a long, breathtaking moment, he just sat there, chest heaving, listening to the fading, mournful whine of the blades. The cabin was quiet but alive, with the soft, ragged breaths of the men he'd brought home, the weight of the storm still hanging heavy in the air. Jack closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath he'd been holding since he first lifted off. Can you feel that release? Ava Turner was the first to reach the chopper, her boots crunching across the snow with urgency as she flung the door open wide. Her eyes met Jack's, wide with something like awe, pure, raw awe. You did it, she whispered, her voice catching in the freezing cold. Jack just gave her a small, steady nod, his face calm but his eyes, oh, his eyes were blazing with life. Ethan Blake climbed out next, leaning hard on Jack's shoulder as he steadied himself. Could he even stand without him? Couldn't have done it without you, Jack, he said, his voice strong despite the exhaustion weighing him down. Jack looked at him for a heartbeat, then just squeezed his shoulder in reply. Words? Who needs words when you've just defied the heavens? The medics swooped in fast, pulling the injured from the cabin with skilled, steady hands, their headlamps casting eerie red glows in the swirling, relentless snow. Jack watched them work, his heart swelling. Those men he'd brought back would be all right. That was enough. That was all he needed. He climbed down from the cockpit, his boots slipping slightly on the ice. Did he care? Not a bit. The cold bit at his face, sharp and unforgiving, but he didn't feel it. He strode across the pad, the storm still howling around him like a defeated foe. But it felt different now, not a threat, oh no, but a challenge he'd already crushed beneath his will. Inside the hangar, the others waited, the mechanics, the dispatchers, even the cooks who kept the coffee hot when the night stretched into eternity. They watched him walk in, their faces open, unguarded. Can you picture it? No laughter this time, no careless jabs, just a quiet, reverent respect that wrapped around him like a warm, comforting blanket. Ava stepped up beside him, her breath fogging in the frosty air. I didn't know you still had it in you, she said with a smile that was half apology, half bursting pride. Did she ever doubt him? Jack let out a quiet, soul-deep breath, his own smile small but so real. Neither did I, he said softly. Can you hear the honesty in that? And somehow, that simple truth felt like enough. The radio crackled in the background, updates from other rescue teams pouring in steady now that the worst had passed. Jack listened with half an ear, but his mind, his mind was soaring back in the sky where the fear had finally let him go. He felt light, almost weightless, like a man who'd finally dropped a burden he'd carried far too long. Ethan walked over, his face flushed from the cold, a fresh bandage stark against his forehead, proof of the battle they'd won. "You saved us all tonight," he said, his voice low but rock steady. Jack shook his head, humble to the core. "Just did what had to be done," he replied, his tone even, unshaken. He didn't need the praise. He didn't crave the applause, no way. The flight itself had been enough, more than enough. Word spread fast through the station, and by dawn, the whole town of Pine Creek seemed to know. Can you imagine the buzz? Messages flooded in over the radio from fire crews, from other rescue stations, from families who'd waited through the endless night for news. They all shouted the same thing, "Thank you." But Jack didn't linger to soak it in, did he ever? He moved through the hangar quietly, checking each machine as he always did, his hands steady as stone, his eyes clear as the dawn. The work was what grounded him, what reminded him who he was, don't you see? And for the first time in years, he felt like that was more than enough. Later that morning, the sun broke through the clouds, glorious, golden light, turning the snow into a dazzling blanket of hope. Jack stood outside for a moment, his breath fogging in the crisp, cold air. He looked up at the sky, at the pale blue that had been hidden all night. Can you feel that peace? Something inside him settled, warm and sure. He thought about that last flight, the one that had haunted him for so long. Did it still hurt? He thought about the men he'd lost, their voices still echoing in the quiet corners of his mind. But today, those memories didn't feel like chains, no way. They felt like wings, a soaring reminder of who he'd been and who he still was. Ava found him there, a mug of hot coffee steaming in her hands. "You're a quiet hero, Jack," she said softly, handing him the cup. Did she know how true that was? He took it with a small, grateful smile, his fingers warming against the ceramic. "I'm just a mechanic," he said, humble as ever. But they both knew that wasn't true, not anymore. She looked at him for a long moment, then just nodded. "Well," she said with a quiet, knowing smile, "sometimes mechanics save the world, don't they?" Jack let out a quiet laugh, the sound small but so sure, pure Jack. "Sometimes," he agreed. As the day wore on, the station roared back to life, engines rumbling, radios crackling, the steady rhythm of people who understood that every day might demand more than you thought you could give. Can you hear it? Jack moved among them, not as the man they'd once overlooked, but as the one they turned to without question. How's that for a change? He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't need them, did he ever? The respect in their eyes was enough, more than enough. The way they stepped aside for him now, the way they listened when he spoke, it was a quiet thing, but oh, it was real. And Jack had learned, hadn't he, that sometimes quiet things were the strongest of all. That night, long after the hangar lights dimmed and the world outside had gone still, Jack sat alone in the cockpit of Eagle 4. The engine was off, the rotors silent, but he sat there anyway. Why leave? His hands rested lightly on the controls, steady as ever. He let the silence fill the space around him, let it seep into the corners of his heart. Can you feel that calm? He thought about what came next. Maybe he'd fly again, could he? Maybe he'd keep his feet on the ground. But for the first time in years, the choice felt like his to make, really his, and that was enough. He took a slow, deep breath, the cold night air sharp and alive in his lungs. In the darkness, he could still hear the echoes of the storm. Did they scare him? Not anymore. He had faced them, and he had won. Oh, how he'd won. As he stepped down from the chopper, he paused for a moment, his hand resting on the cold metal of the fuselage. A small smile touched his lips, pure, quiet joy, and he whispered softly to himself, "Still worthy." The words felt like a promise, quiet and sure, Jack through and through. Outside, the snow fell in soft, silent drifts. Beautiful, isn't it? The world hushed and bright under the winter moon. Jack walked away from the helicopter, his footsteps sure, his heart light as a feather. He knew there would be more storms ahead, wouldn't there always be, but he also knew he was ready, ready. And in that simple, unshakable truth, Jack Coleman found something he'd thought he'd lost forever, not the roar of the engines or the crushing weight of the sky, but the quiet, fierce courage to keep moving forward, no matter how fierce the storm. And this time, can you believe it, he wasn't afraid to fly again. Jack Coleman's story stirs something deep within me, a mix of awe and frustration. His journey from a broken pilot to a heroic mechanic screams that our past doesn't chain us, it's the courage we muster today that shapes who we are. I'm inspired, truly, by his redemption, proof that even in our darkest moments, we can rise and save others. But it burns me up how society sleeps on people like Jack, the quiet warriors who don't chase applause. These unsung heroes, mechanics, laborers, the behind-the-scenes grinders, are the heartbeat of our world, yet we barely glance their way. It's a disgrace we don't shout their worth from the rooftops. Jack's tale isn't just a feel-good moment, it's a loud call to rethink who we value and why. I'm left hopeful, yet restless for change. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, doesn't it, often in the quietest, most unexpected places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, no spotlight needed. Some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry. Can that be enough? And sometimes that alone is enough to change a life, truly change it. You may forget the story, will you? But if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Don't let it. Subscribe to Heartfelt Gratitude Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost, ever.